I would like to suggest that the United States is actually collapsing. And I want to show you that by taking a side in this scenario, it actually will eclipse your ability to see what is really going on or what could be a future path. If you are new to my channel, welcome. I'm Saratoga Ocean, and I work together with an interdimensional, interuniversal, and extraterrestrial force known as Telstar, along with Archangel Michael. And my goal here is to help you effectively navigate the chaos here on planet Earth so that you can stay on your ascension path. Okay, now, the controllers of this planet are always dividing us, and in so doing, they render us completely blind to something else that is going on. So let's expand our consciousness, let's take an extraterrestrial view, and let us use the United States as a simple example of a larger principle. Now, when I say extraterrestrial viewpoint, I do not mean people from outer space, spaceships. No, that's not what I mean. I'm talking about context. You know, if you get into a tunnel vision kind of a viewpoint and you're just looking at a very small space, you can't see the bigger picture. So the way I define an extraterrestrial viewpoint is one in which we back away from planet Earth, we back away in our consciousness from everything going on. We get a very wide-angled view of all of it from a distance. And when we do that, we will see things that we never saw before. We will be able to exercise a level of intelligence that perhaps we never fully tapped into. So let's explore that today and try an interesting little experiment. Now, currently, we are constantly being told to pick a side and be either for something or against something, or generally it's both. Be for this and against that, be for this and against that. And then everybody divides themselves into the appropriate side, and then they go at it. So knowing that this is going on, we want to start by examining what is the playing field that we are on? What exactly is the field of life or the field of being that we are on? Now, most people generally think that the playing field, for lack of a better word, the playing field consists of the circumstances in their country, on the planet, in their personal life, basically an Earth-based reality. But what do you think happens if we expand beyond that and consider our playing field to be the universe itself? Because that, in truth, is more accurate. The reason it's more accurate is because when we understand that our playing field of life is the universe, our options expand, our intelligence expands, our point of view expands, and overall, we are therefore able to acquire naturally a lot more knowledge from what we observe happening here on planet Earth. On the other hand, if you limit yourself to thinking that your playing field right now is just planet Earth and all the physical stuff going on here, that you feel perhaps that your body is trapped inside of, or trapped inside of those circumstances, you're going to be really limited as to what your possibilities are, what your options are, and what your level of intelligence that you can tap into will be. So currently, our time on planet Earth is either kind of like a sports arena, a giant global sports arena where everybody takes a side and then we want to see who wins, or we are in the universe on an ascension journey on a path of evolution that extends far into the cosmos with really no limitations at all. You can still be on planet Earth inside these circumstances, but yet understand that the more important context for your existence is your journey of evolution in the cosmos. That is primary. Your time here on planet Earth is very much secondary. So in order to explore this, we're going to take a real life example of what people call the political situation here in the US. Now, an Earth-based limited view of the political situation here in the US would look something like this. Well, you're either a Republican, or you're a Democrat, or you're in the middle, but essentially you need to pick a side and decide who you're going to vote for. And, there's whatever goes along with that, whatever mindsets, beliefs, collective understanding goes along with that. And that's kind of the simplicity of the whole thing. And then, of course, there's all the fighting that goes along with that, all the self-righteousness, all the confusion, all the victimization, and on and on and on it goes. So that's sort of the small view of things. But let's try an interesting little experiment. You are going to find this fascinating, you guys. Let's take that same scenario. Let's step back from planet Earth. Let's take that extraterrestrial viewpoint that is no longer a part of any of it, but is simply observing it from a different space altogether. What do you think we see? We suddenly can recognize that both of these two sides exist now as cults. Each one is an actual cult. And I'm going to show you how this is different from how things were before these cults came into existence. How do you know they're a cult, Saratoga? You might be asking. Well, it's kind of obvious because each side has their slogans, has their symbols, has their way of looking and talking, and they very much have the hallmarks of a cult. I mean, they kind of look alike sometimes. They kind of dress alike sometimes. And the funny thing about cults is that friends and family members are always trying to get their loved ones out of the cult, right? But we see that happening here with these two major cults. I'm not even going to call them political because I want you to see them without the political veil over top of them. I want you to see them exactly as they are. Now, after we finish our little experiment, of course, you are free to identify with one or the other, to pick a side of one or the other. But if you do, I would suggest that you do so consciously, with full awareness of exactly what you're doing, without losing your higher, more expanded level of consciousness in the process. And that you make sure that you never forget your actual true purpose of being on planet Earth, which has nothing to do with either one of these scenarios. And remember, I'm using this as an example to show you what you will not see if you become a part of either one and begin to identify with it. So let's take the words Democrat and Republican out of this conversation altogether. Let's just dispense with those words. Let's pretend those words don't even exist. And let's just look at the two cults as they actually are so that we can recognize them. And in a little while, I'm going to show you why this really matters. Just remember, we are imagining ourselves to be extraterrestrials viewing the Earth from afar, from a completely different set of experiences and understanding. So let's start with one cult. I'm going to call it the Rainbow Cult. The Rainbow Cult has their own flag, which they want to be the dominant flag. They hate the old flag. They want to get rid of it. They want to destroy it. They want their flag to be the main, most important flag actually on the planet, but certainly in the US. Now, the rainbow cult basically, this is really a generality, but they kind of have an image of dressing like a band of hooligans. They want to change the meaning of words. So if their overall physical presentation is like a ragtag band of hooligans who just wear all kinds of weird things, it really represents their point of view that they believe in total cultural anarchy. And they derive their sense of power from anger and defiance. They live in the land of many numbers and many colors where basically anything goes. And they are a highly creative bunch where you are allowed to say that anything at all is real, even if it's not. So overall, their image is very colorful, full of numbers and rainbows and colors and creativity, and they are wildly out of control because any reality that they want to say is real becomes real whether it's actually real or not. And they kind of like to associate themselves with the word liberal because they really enjoy being wildly out of control. Kind of liberally out of control. Okay, so that is one political cult. That's a very generalized view of one political cult. Now let's talk about the other cult, the other side of this equation. I'm going to call this second cult the Red Hat cult. Now, the Red Hat cult is very different. They're more have the vibe of kind of like an army. They have their symbols and slogans, but rather than being all over the place like the rainbow cult, they like to stick to one predominant color, which is red, that might be accented with a little bit of blue and white. They are much more disciplined. They believe the same things, and they enjoy looking very much alike in the way that they dress. And they have commandeered the formerly American flag as their cult symbol. The Bible is their instruction manual, and guns are their security blanket. And the bottom line is, if it's not in the Bible, it's just not legitimate. Now, they like to call themselves conservative because they're essentially pretty uniform, repressed, and generally closed-minded. Now, remember, we're observing all of this from a distance. We're extraterrestrials. We don't know anything about what's going on. We're just looking at the rainbow cult. We're looking at the Red Hat cult. We're looking how much they literally despise each other. And we're saying, wow, that's a little bit weird. Now, let me show you how the existence of these two cults offer us a large piece of evidence that the country is already destroyed. Let me explain what I mean. Now, this used to be a country of individual people who shared the same basic culture. People had their political opinions and they discussed things. But politics did not form the core, the absolute core of their belief system, the core of their life, the core of their purpose. It was not the center of their being almost. And that was when things were relatively stable and people actually had lives of their own that they shared with each other and that they talked with each other about. They actually had lots of things to talk about that had nothing to do with what has now formed as two basic separate cults. So we don't actually have politics anymore. What we really have now is the battle of the cults. I mean, people have literally branded themselves with the symbols of these cults. Both sides have their leaders, and both sides are heavily manipulated. Now, these cults were clearly formed behind the scenes at a corporate level. Why do I say that? I say it because they each have highly commercialized symbols and branding. That is not natural, you guys. That is not normal. Let me ask you guys a question, or you can ask this question of yourselves. Why is it that these two cults are so heavily branded in such a highly commercialized way? Why? What would be the purpose? What would be the purpose of a branding that is so distinct, so commercial, and so obvious, with a sense that one should become a member of one or the other? I know they don't call them members, but that's technically what they are. Well, here's a thought. You know what? By being so clearly and obviously identified with one of these two cults, what do you think happens when AI becomes the ruling force of humanity? Because that, my friends, is the goal. If you've been following me, you understand all the details about what that means. Think about how easy, how incredibly easy with AI it is going to be to separate people into groups, identify them, and decide what in the heck you want to do with those people. That's an interesting thought. So people are literally branding themselves so openly and in such a bizarre fashion that they, in the future, can easily be segmented into different groups for an entirely different purpose. Now, you might say, why? Why would anybody do that? I want to explain to you how it is that I think the political system itself is breaking down entirely. And what's going to be left are these cults and these people who have self-identified as being a part of one or the other, or as being a part of a branch of one or the other. Because see, if these cults were really about politics, they would be shoring up the political system. But they're not. What's happening is the political system is actually collapsing. So this could all be actually a very clever trap. And this is the danger that this is what we risk when we fall into these kinds of traps, lose our sovereignty, lose our individuality, and identify with something that is other than ourselves, that is being literally commercially produced, almost as though it is a bizarre cartoon. Now, moving on, each of these two cults has their leader, and each of these two cults also has their own version of God or a God. The Rainbow Cult in the US is currently led by Joe Biden, and their God is climate change. The Red Hat Cult is currently led by Trump. Their God is the Bible. Now, both sides are extremely righteous, beyond righteous, that their God is the right God. So let's just say the weather is the thing for the Rainbow Cult, and the Bible is the thing for the Red Hat Cult. And they literally bend their lives around these two different gods. Now, I don't want to suggest that there's any way to get rid of these cults and fix this mess, because I don't really think there is. And it's actually entirely understandable that people would gravitate towards one cult or the other, because there doesn't appear to be any other options. So what I've described here are the two main cults, but we also have many spin-off factions and cults and divisions and aspects of the main cults that are sort of like tentacles branching out from the main cult. But all the smaller spin-offs are still generally attached to what I would call the main mother cult. So each one you could refer to as a mother cult. Now, with all that said, I am very doubtful that either one of these cults are destined to survive in the long run. That's because they are too distracted in their war against each other to see the bigger picture. Just as an aside, you guys, as I was thinking about all of this, I was starting to feel like I think we're all living in a three-dimensional cartoon. It starts to sound like that. Let me show you what I mean. Now, in my opinion, the U.S. government is currently in a state of collapse. Why do I say that? Well, let's take a look at a few things now that we've backed away from the cults, so we can have a little more perspective. And we can start to see what is right before our eyes that we are probably missing if we are identified with either one of these cults. So let's just pause for a moment and think about what an orderly civilization would look like. What a coherent society would look like, where everyone functions as an individual, as a basically sovereign being, and they basically share the same culture. There are leaders who keep everything in order, or something along those lines. Let's just imagine that for one brief moment. Now, isn't that what the U.S. is kind of supposed to be? But clearly it's not. Take a look from a distant perspective, at what is happening with the government here. We have the two cult leaders. The Rainbow Cult's leader is essentially a human vegetable. And the Red Hat's cult leader could very well end up in prison. It doesn't matter why or how, just the fact that it's entirely possible that he could just end up in prison. I mean, that's fine. So we have a vegetable and we have a criminal, supposedly. See, it doesn't matter whether either of these things are true, or it doesn't really matter. The point is that this is how it's labeled. This is how it's being labeled. So we have these two cults who are supposed to choose one of these two leaders to be the leader of all the cults. And of those two choices, one could end up in prison for life, and the other is basically a malfunctioning zombie. And everything I'm saying, it doesn't matter if you believe it or not. It doesn't matter which side you're on or which side you think is lying. Just put all of that aside. Remember, we're not involved. We're just ETs looking at the situation here and wondering what the heck is going on planet Earth. Now, here's where it gets really cartoonish. We look down at the US and we say, one of these guys is like a walking, talking, wrinkled vegetable, zombie, and the other guy is labeled the worst criminal of all time. So we have, this is kind of funny, right? We have the vegetable and we have the criminal, and they're both supposed to fight each other, backed by their massive cults, to see who wins. And it appears that the only arguments they have against each other is that each one is a liar. Now, you all might know that we recently had a so-called presidential debate here in the U.S. When it dawned on me what this whole scenario signified, that's when I started to feel like I'm living in a comic book. I really feel like I'm living in a badly written comic book. Now pay close attention, because this is going to give you a chance to see something that maybe you didn't see at all. This is the part where it gets really, really interesting. So in the debate, they put the current so-called president. What does that entity make me think of? The first thing that came to mind, and this is going to sound really crazy, but it just keeps coming into my mind like this. It's like, have you ever had, we go to the farmer's market a lot of times, right? And you can get a bunch of potatoes and you bring them home, and maybe you maybe you would stick them in a drawer and maybe you're eating them and you accidentally left one in the drawer and you forgot about it and it sat there for a long time. And you know how it gets all kind of shrunken and wrinkly and it's like you take it out and you're like, oh, this isn't really going to work anymore. That's sort of like, well, the entity they're saying is the president. It's like there's nobody there. There's literally nobody there. What does this mean? This means there is no president. There's no president. That's not a president. That thing, entity, whatever, couldn't be the president. So therefore, we actually don't have a president. We probably haven't had one for a very long time. It means there's literally no one person in charge. And I'm going to answer for you because I know a lot of people were questioning that fiasco and they were saying, why do they want to keep this person around? What is going on? None of this makes any sense. How did this happen? Why is this happening? It's like people are kind of freaking out before they go into their next level of denial. But they're freaking out because it's like, all you come up with is why? Just why? Well, I'm going to share with you what I think the why actually is. And this is a very clever little piece of psychological warfare. It's so clever. It actually kind of blows my mind how clever it is. I don't even think humans came up with this. I think somebody else must have come up with this because I actually think it's too clever for humans to think such a weird, diabolical plot. So here's the psychological manipulation part of all of this. Somebody somewhere, human or otherwise, I don't know, somebody somewhere wants us to get used to the idea of not having a president. Think about it. The guy they claim to be president, who they put out on a silver platter for all the world to see that he couldn't possibly be the president. So you have that. Well, that guy's not the president. I guess we don't have a president. And then the alternative, who maybe could be a president, we're told, well, he may not be the president either because he might end up in prison. So, you could very well end up with many more years of no president. Think about what that means, you guys. That means one of the three branches of the U.S. government is in a state of total collapse, and this is what they really want. They want us to absorb and understand that, you don't really need a president, do you? It's kind of okay without one. So it's not like the old days when it would say, well, let's decide who would be the better president. No, that's not the message we're getting. The message we're getting is neither one of these people should ever be president. They're both horrible. One guy's not even there, so he's definitely not the president. He's just, I don't know what, like a ghost or something? I don't know, but he's definitely not the president. The other guy can't be president either because he's dangerous, he's a criminal, he's a horrible human being, he's going to destroy the country, and he's probably going to go to prison anyway. So get used to that idea, people. Just get used to the idea of not having a president. And isn't it interesting? Out of all the people, they can't find anyone else except for these two. So they've got these two, both of which they claim are unacceptable, can't be president, forget it, it's no good. You just get used to the feel of not actually having a president. So this is all a very sneaky, very subliminal message, and it explains what on the surface looks like they're crazy, but in actuality, it could be a real, true method to the madness. And the way this starts to go into the subconscious mind is that having a president is like the worst thing that could ever happen, because no matter how it turns out, it's going to be horrific. So it's like the person who wants to be the president should be locked away forever, and then the vegetable gets to stay because he can't do anything anyway. So I want to propose that the executive branch of the US government is clearly, completely collapsing. I'm going to predict that the legislative branch is next, along with the judicial branch, that the whole thing is collapsing like a bunch of old towers that are falling to the ground. Okay, let's just pause. Let's take a deep breath. Take a look at everything I just described. I just described a scenario without all of the distractions and the chaos and all the other things surrounding it, the fog of it all, right? I just kind of described what does it look like if you don't have any of the propaganda entering your mind and you just look at it with a clear eye and see it for what it is. And that's when it really becomes shocking. So, of course, the next question is, what in the world is the point of all this? Well, here's the point when it comes to what I was just saying about so-called elections and things like that. Do you know that the controllers have openly stated that in the future they do not plan to have any elections? Do you want to know why? It's not because, oh, we're going to be dictators, we won't need elections. No, here's what their plan is. AI is going to be so effective at knowing everything about every single person on Earth. It'll know your thoughts, it'll know your emotions, it'll know your tendencies, it'll know more about you than you know about yourself. They've openly said this. They have also said, therefore, elections will no longer be necessary. Do you know why? Because AI will already know who you would vote for. And then AI will decide who wins. Because AI is going to be tapped into everyone's brains, everyone's minds, everyone's emotions, and it's going to come up with an answer. Well, we don't need to go through the messy election stuff. That's not necessary. We'll just let AI tell us who would be the president or the whatever in charge. We'll just let AI tell us, and then we can dispense with all of that nonsense. Now, what I just described about AI, that's not imminent. That's like not in the next year. We don't know. I'm just describing to you there is a much, much, much bigger story going on behind all of what we see on the surface with these cults. And if you don't think there's some very effective mind control going on with all of this stuff, think about the fact that people actually find it acceptable that a guy who's not even there, incapable of anything serious, he could be the president. That's okay. We could go into any nursing home and pull someone out of there and say, why don't you be the president? It's not hard. All you have to do is move to a different house. Or on the other side of it, they're saying, you know what? If the other guy's in prison, he can be president from there. That'll be just fine. So, do you see the collapse? Do you see how this isn't even real? This is insane. This is not what it looks like on the surface. So basically, the idea of the election itself, the idea of voting and all the ideas that go along with this, that's not the point. I'm not even going to speak to that. That's a different subject altogether. What I want to speak to is basically how deeply are people's minds being changed, being morphed into a perspective that is patently absurd. And this is why finding your way on planet Earth is ultimately going to be a losing proposition if this is the only perspective that you ever have. Because I'm going to propose you actually can't get a truly legitimate perspective in the midst of all of this intensive mind control, subliminal mind control, and everything that I've described to you so far. And it's kind of interesting when you think about it, because everything I've described to you here today, this is what it looks like when you stop looking at it through a so-called political lens and you look at it for what it actually is. Now, with all that said, I do not want to imply in any way that any of you guys need to not be involved with any of this. I'm not telling you in any way, shape, or form what you need to do. Every person should know their own purpose. If you find a purpose in your life to be involved with any of what I described, because you see value in that, you see purpose and intention in that, you need to follow your heart, you need to follow your intuition, you need to follow your own wisdom and your own inner guidance. I am not here to tell any of you guys what you should or should not do. My only purpose here is to offer you a different perspective so that you can perhaps see more, you can expand your consciousness, and you can actually find more wisdom from within yourself, because you are learning how to look at things in a different way, in a more expanded way, perhaps in a more conscious way. You're not trapped in the propaganda. You're not trapped in the news. You're not trapped in the media. You're not trapped in what you're told you need to be thinking. And it's actually perfectly acceptable to be in some way, if you feel it's right for you, to be in some way involved with any of this, as long as you feel you can do it and not be so identified with it. Not see it as the beginning and end of your entire existence. In other words, you need to make a choice about what is the most important thing to you in your life. I would suggest that maybe if you're on an ascension path, the most important thing would be your own ascension in the cosmos, in the universe, your own evolution as a human creator in this universe. So to whatever degree you might want to tap into any of the stuff I just described, you just want to ask yourself, how is this serving my evolution? How is this serving my purpose in this life as an evolving human being? And maybe you will feel there's some purpose. That is completely legitimate. No one outside of you should ever hold greater authority over you about what is legitimate for you and what isn't. That, to me, is the most key thing that each one of us needs to always remember and never forget. We are our own sovereign guides because we have an inner connection to the creator of all that is, to the universe, to something far beyond this tiny little speck of dust that we call planet Earth. We're connected to something that is huge, massive, amazing, incredible. We each carry that connection inside of ourselves. It's not out there somewhere. It's within you. Every person has that door within themselves. That's where you can find the guidance for how you personally and individually choose to navigate this entire situation. And I know I've used the example of the US in what I've shared with you here, but wherever you are in the world, you can still try it out in your country or wherever you are. Just say to yourself, what if I were to take an extraterrestrial perspective on everything going on in the world that I currently live in? And you can just play around with it, and you will be amazed at what you might come to know without anybody having to tell you anything. You could look at it as a fun experiment. Now, with all that I have shared here or suggested, I also want to acknowledge that there are a lot of people who don't want any part of either one of these cults. That's obvious. You could certainly be one of those people yourself. Whatever the case, I still think it's important to be aware of this, because that way you can see so much more clearly what the bigger picture is and what it actually is that you are going to need to navigate, that we're all going to need to navigate as individual sovereign creators. I mostly want to show you how these cults are being used to manipulate our view of reality, our understanding of who we are, our understanding of the planet, and they're designed to keep pushing against our minds to get us to accept a vastly different reality from anything we've ever known, and one that unfortunately is destined to not be very human at all. So everything I've shared with you here it's not even really about the actual circumstances as much as it's about the sinister underlying mind control that is going around with all of it. And I think in a way, by seeing some of this in a completely different way, such as what we've been talking about here today, you actually could feel a sense of relief. You could actually feel like, wow, it's kind of a relief to notice that this is all just one big, weird cartoon. And I don't really have to put all of this toxic energy in my brain, in my mind, in my being, in my system. That I can actually be led and guided by the more powerful, it's like an understatement, right? The extremely powerful and potent evolving universe of which we are all a part. I can actually, in the midst of all of this, it's almost like comedy, right? In the midst of all of this, I can actually be exploring my ability to create, to manifest, and to become more of who I really am in the cosmos as I stand here on planet Earth. So I hope you enjoyed this little adventure that we all took together here today. And if so, please give it a thumbs up and share it out with anyone else who you think would like to take a little adventure into a new way of observing things here on planet Earth. And be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because I'm here on Tuesdays with all new videos. And with that, thank you so much for being here. I really enjoy sharing my ideas with you all, sharing the things that I know with you guys. And with that, I want to send you so much love, light, and high vibrational energy. Have a beautiful day, my friends. Namaste.